There's been 74 acts that have restricted Christian freedom since the year 2000, and nearly half of those have been in the last 5 years. And I have in front of me the Australian Christian Freedom Index, and they surveyed 10,808 Australians. And here's a couple of stats. 92% of Christians said it is riskier to affirm Christian beliefs than 5 years ago. 73% felt pressure to keep their beliefs private in public. 42% experienced hostility, threats, or harassment for expressing a Christian worldview. And 1 in 4 were denied opportunities in work, volunteering, or leadership because of their beliefs. And so I confidently say that the problems we're seeing today are because the church has left the public square.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think there are 2 points on this that are really key to make to separate them out. Absolutely, there is an attack at a policy level, at a governmental level, on Christian freedom, but also on Christianity as being the core of our nation. And that sort of brings me to the second point.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Here I Stand podcast, a podcast by the Young Conservatives for Christ, available on YouTube, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, with clips going up on Instagram and YouTube, and you can find out more about us and all of those places in the description of this video. And I have today a very special guest, Edward Schuller, who is the National Secretary of the TPAA, a rebel education union. And he's also the spokesperson for the Red Union, a collection of patriotic Australian unions that are not affiliated with the Labor Party. He's been on Sky News and he's been published in The Spectator. He's spoken at rallies recently about mass migration, as well as appearing on podcasts such as Two Worlds Collide, the ARC podcast with Joel Jamal, and I have the pleasure in having him now on this podcast. Edward, welcome to the Here I Stand podcast.
Hey, the pleasure's all mine. Thanks for having me on, John.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on. And for those who don't know about you, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, and how you got involved in the Red Union and politics in general?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always had a bit of an interest in politics, raised in a family that was very active in politics. But above all, mate, I'm a Christian like you. My purpose in life is to serve Christ. And I've got the great privilege of being able to do that in a number of different areas. But yeah, more broadly, I give speeches, I write articles, and one of my day jobs is with the Red Union, so an alternative education union, non-left-wing education union in the TPAA, essentially doing the day-to-day union business, going into bat for workers' conditions, advocating for reform in the education system, which we'll touch on later. And also being apolitical in the sense that we don't give any money to a political party. And obviously the traditional union movement is joined at the hip with the Labor Party and other left-wing causes, which again, we can touch on. But yeah, that's a bit about me, mate. I'm passionate about politics insofar as I love my country and I want it to succeed. And I think we're heading in a very concerning direction, a very terrible one, really. And we're seeing a lot of what can happen here very quickly happen in the UK and the US. And I desperately want to reverse that in whatever part that I can play. But yeah, a bit about me, mate.
Yeah, no, that's good. And yeah, do you want to tell us a bit about the Red Union? Because I think a lot of people probably haven't actually heard about the Red Union group and the work that you do. So how did this sort of get started, and what sort of direction that you guys are wanting to take it in?
Yeah, well, it started in 2012, so still relatively new, 14 years old. Obviously, the idea of competition and unionism is very foreign to us here in Australia. It's not overseas. There's a lot of competitive unionism overseas, but in Australia, it's very much been there's one union for each sector, and it's divided up, and they all essentially serve the Labor Party. So that's basically where we came into it. Started on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. It was an election year. It was started by a group of nurses. Anyway, there was this big Queensland health payroll bungle. And because it was an election year and the Labor Party was on track for what was a historic defeat, the union, the QNMU, the Queensland Nurse and Midwives Union, decided not to represent their members, didn't really say anything at all about the issue until the election had passed. And the nurses were frustrated because it was clearly a political thing and they were trading in their obligation to their members for their own political convenience and their own jobs. So from that, a new union called the NPAQ, the Nurses Professional Association of Queensland, was formed. And then that's blossomed into every single state and a number of different unions, particularly the Teachers Professional Association, which of course is what I'm particularly involved in. But yeah, it's essentially started by frontline workers. The Red Union is a service provider for all of those different independent unions to be able to set up and run basically a low-cost model. The main thing is we're $300 to $400 cheaper in pretty much every single jurisdiction because we don't donate to political parties and we focus solely on what our members are concerned about. So in and through that act, we're basically depriving that excess fee of $300 per union member. We're depriving the Labor Party and left-wing social political campaigns from having that. So $300 for every single member, and we've got over 25,000 members Australia-wide and growing. So that's a bit about us, particularly involved in the health and education space. That's where the overwhelming majority of our members are. But we also have independent unions for coppers, for firefighters, for independent workers more broadly, and also doctors. So we made a bit of a name for ourselves during COVID when we stood up against the vaccine mandates, no matter what you thought about the vaccine at the time. And obviously, some views have been proven very correct in time in terms of hesitancy there. But there was never there should never have been forced onto frontline workers. And what happened during COVID was essentially every single mainstream union threw the worker under the bus and sided with the government, their employer, and said, no, I don't really care about your workplace rights, don't care about your own individual autonomy. You got to take that job and we're not going to support you if you don't, type thing. So that's when we came into it. We were going to stand with the worker, not the employer. And obviously what ensued throughout COVID, there were so many horrific things. But I think that was one of them, basically forcing people to get a vaccine that they should have had no obligation to get. Otherwise, they would lose their job. And so many did. And we tried to support as many people through that as we could. But I guess that's a bit of a background about us. Now, since that period of time, we're appealing more broadly to big swaths of nurses and teachers, and yeah, looking to grow in every single state.
Yeah, no, that, that's really interesting, and I'm curious your thoughts on this because you bring up COVID, and I didn't take the vaccine. My parents didn't take the vaccine. I was at school at the time, but both of my parents lost their jobs for a certain amount of time because of that vaccine mandate. Do you think that the big union that Labor hold in their grasp, do you think that had an effect on advocacy concerning like the average Joe's job in certain aspects, and then sort of because you guys were able to stand up, if you guys were maybe bigger, or if the previous unions weren't controlled by Labor, do you think we could have had a different outcome potentially?
Look, it's hard to tell. You'd want to say yes. I mean, obviously, if we were bigger, I mean, we took the
Mm,
stance very clearly, and we copped so much flack, and the Labor government in Queensland, in particular, tried to drive us out of the state. So, yes, if we were bigger, we would have completely stood up. We were all switched
mm,
on. The people working there during that time were switched on to what was happening. But I think more broadly, people were drinking the Kool-Aid at the time, and I think
mm,
that the most frustrating thing for me during the lockdowns was that they were overwhelmingly popular, and there weren't many decisions made during COVID that weren't opinion poll tested. And people like to be locked down. People like to have the police state safety net type thing, at least for the first year, I'd say, throughout 2020. And I think it dissipated throughout 2022, definitely. But yeah, there was some dark times there. So I think it showed a lot about what humanity is capable of, and also seemingly incapable of. I mean, you would have hoped that our country would stand up um, a lot more firm to what happened to us, but we didn't, and that's a great shame. But I think it's important that institutions that did get that recognition. I wasn't even working with Red Union at the time. That's the work of people like Jack McGuire, our managing director, Graham Haycroft, one of our directors as well. That's their work. That's their story to tell, and it's an incredible one. But yeah, it's great to be part of an organisation that was steadfast during that time.
yeah, no, 100%. And I think potentially part of the reason why people maybe didn't stand up is the philosophy of how government should be run. Like in modern day politics, it's generally sort of thought of that the government has to take care of you, has to be there for your every need. That's why we're seeing the blowout of the NDIS, Centrelink. Bureaucrats are everywhere. I think it's something like one in a quarter, 1 in 4 Australians are involved in the governmental process in some area. And I think that sort of comes down to how we're educated. We're not taught much about civics at school anymore. And so this comes to you being the National Secretary of the TPAA, which is an alternative education union. Do you want to tell us a bit about what you guys are advocating for and sort of what do you think the education system should look like compared to what we have it as it is now?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the TPAA stands very much for decentralization. So, what we've got in the education system at the moment, like you mentioned, is a top heavy bureaucrat run system
Mm,
run out of capital cities, which have nothing to do with the local school and communities that they have carryover. So, what you've seen is principals, local parents, and local teachers just be completely disenfranchised because they're accountable to this bureaucratic blob that, again, makes decisions that they don't feel the consequences for. So, they're very often poor, far removed decisions that are really made in the self interest of a lot of these bureaucrats in the department to justify their own jobs. And this is what you see with the increasing paperwork burden on frontline teachers. This is what you see with more and more money being thrown at the education system. We've never spent more on education. It all just sits in the Department of Education. It does not reach the front lines. Results are getting poorer. So there's a number of things that have to change, but I guess to distill it down to one thing, it would be decentralizing the system, which means having locally run schools with elected boards whereby a principal is accountable to an even number of teachers and parents, making the best decisions for local students. And I think a big part of that as well is having a student voucher system whereby the funding follows the student rather than is just thrown into different patches or different schools. There's got to be a bit of common sense there. Obviously, for smaller schools out west, you'd want to make sure that they're getting funding because the funding that comes from like 12 students in a class is not going to keep the school afloat. So there's a bit of nuance there. But broadly speaking, we need to incentivize schools making decisions which reflect what the local community is crying out for. And I think overwhelmingly what teachers are crying out for is a bit of respect for the craft. And instead of being able to learn the craft and teach well, they're bogged down in the curriculum. They're bogged down in these departmental procedures. And they're also, on the flip side, when they go through education themselves, when they're studying to become a teacher, the degrees are so heavy with all of this political trite that has nothing to do with the craft of teaching. So there might be a 3 or 4 year education degree. We think you can get that done in pretty much one year, if not less, and then also having paid placement. So we've got a big reform agenda. It's called the Go Local campaign, and what we want to see is those schools run locally, gutting the federal Department of Education. There's no need for it. It should just be run out of Treasury, I suppose, or finance, distributing the funds to the states, wherever that's required. We can't have a federal curriculum. It's a complete and utter blob. We need state-based curriculums, but more so with local autonomy. And we need to have a strong focus on principals having the autonomy to run their schools so they can make decisions on staffing, on curriculum implementation, and on student behavior stuff. So we see there's a massive rise in student behavior issues, and there's a broader reason for that, which is parenting in society more generally. But parents and principals rather have their hands tied a lot of the time because they're, again, accountable to the Department of Education rather than the people that they're, servicing the school for. So, we've got a big reform agenda that includes changing education degrees from this 3 or 4 year bachelor, which is 3/4 worth can be thrown out the window very quickly, to having a 1 year intensive, and then you've got 2 years paid placement, whereby you've got teachers then being able to have pseudo non-contact time because they're training up these new teachers. the biggest thing, and any new teacher will tell you this, is you've got to learn the craft. And if you could have an extra 2 years at the start of your career rather than sitting in a classroom learning about gender theory and multiculturalism or whatever they're teaching, you'd take it. You'd take it because you're going to be way better off in the classroom. So we're overwhelmingly a union. We are a union in as far as we represent the interests of our members. We will help them with any bullying, any allegations, any rostering stuff, all the day-to-day stuff of a union. We'll advocate for pay rises and conditions, but overwhelmingly, we know that reform has to happen, and you're not going to be able to pay for pay rises much longer. Every state's going bust. Our federal economy is completely cooked as well, and we can't just keep handing out receipts and printing more money. So while we want pay rises, and we're asking for some pretty big pay rises, it's all paid for in our reform agenda.
Wow, that's really good. And I can speak to the fact that schools are being hamstrung by the curriculum, whether national or state-wise. I know here in Victoria, when I went to school, I went to a Christian school, and they had some public government funding there too, and they had some lovely, amazing looking buildings. And then I started grade nine, and we had this English book, and this is at a Christian school, and it was full of sexual innuendo, full of swearing. And I raised my voice up about it in grade nine. I'm like, what's going on with this? Like, this is not acceptable for a Christian school. And they're like, look, we got a choice between all of these books that we were given by yeah, like what the curriculum was based on, and they said this is the best one that they had. And I was like, oh, I was shocked. And that's when I went to homeschooling.
Yeah, well,
So,
and that's
yeah,
that's a growing option for so many people, and you see the government cracking down and trying to make homeschooling harder because it's
yeah,
obviously not a great reflection of our education system if parents have such low trust that they bring that in. But I certainly empathise with that train of thought, and the frustration is with Christian schools as well. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was down in Victoria. I was working down in our Victorian office for the first 6 months of last year, and I was working at a couple of different places, and we had some members really raise an issue with us, which was newsworthy in the end. It was reported in the Australian, the Herald Sun, but it was at Trinity Grammar, and this is all publicly available. Anyone can look it up. Trinity Grammar in Victoria, $40,000 a year tuition, like elite Anglican grammar school. And for Pride Month, which we're in now, June, the celebration of sin, the greatest pride of all, they engaged a queer Palestinian motivational speaker to essentially teach some form of sex ed to an all boys school. Like, what are we doing here? If you're a parent and you're paying $40,000 a year for a Christian education, that's what you're getting. And the backstory behind that is they're still beholden on government funding. Like you mentioned, they're still beholden on the government tap being turned on. Otherwise, their lights turn out. So what happened was the government engaged Pride Victoria, which is another government-funded agency, which is separate from the government. So they engaged them, and the school had basically, again, to engage a speaker provided by Pride Victoria, and they chose this man. Anyway, it only came to pass that it was foiled in the end that he didn't speak, because the day before he was about to speak, the students looked him up on Instagram, and there were videos so recently of him doing lewd sexual acts on his social media. And it's like, you would have thought that someone in authority in the school would look at that, but they are just so beholden to these government agencies and ultimately on government funding that you could be paying $40,000 a year and you're still not getting the Christian education that you want for your kids. So it's really tough when it's at that stage, John.
mm. No, 100%. And you would think Christian schools of all would know that it says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but to lose his own soul? I
Yeah.
mean, if you're compromising the whole purpose of your mission, which is to raise up young Christians that are going to be strong in their faith and academics at the same time, I mean, why is there a Christian school? You should just go
Yeah.
to public school. Um, but another example I had was the Jasmine Ewan from the Australian Christian Lobby. She's been really doing good social media on this, and this is a Victorian school curriculum. And they've been it's a respectful relationships curriculum is what it's called,
Yeah.
and they've been teaching kids about sexuality from kinder. Like
Mm.
we're talking about being able to change genders, and there really is no gender binary, and that you can be whatever gender you want to be, and
Yeah.
don't refer to the kids as boys and girls. Refer to them as some like generic like non-gendered term or something like
Yeah.
that. It's absolutely absurd, and teachers want nothing to do with it, but they're being forced into it by these government bureaucrats.
Yeah, and the frustrating thing is, and this is why it's very important that we, or at least some other competition, is on the scene. Is that the Australian Education Union, which is the mainstream left wing education union, pushes this stuff so hard. It pushes it. They partake in all of these pride marches. They're the ones that are wearing the rainbow lanyards, which kids will obviously ask questions about during these times. They're the ones pushing all of the reconciliation stuff, the hating our own country stuff, the gender inequality stuff. It's all pushed through by the union. And they do that in concert with their friends in the Labor Party. So it's really important that the viewers here understand that the Labor Party and the unions are joined at the hip. They are not two separate entities. The Labor Party is a political product of the union movement. That's a fact. You can look it up. The Labor Party was created by the union movement to advance their political interest, and that's what happens to this day. It's as simple as that. They are beholden to the unions. They are not mates working in concert or handshake agreements. They are one and the same. So we've really got to look at, well, if the Labor Party is the political party that is pushing all of this sort of social left-wing social rot at a political level, who's doing it in the institutions? It's the unions, and it's overwhelmingly the education union and also the nursing and midwifery union. And I'll tell a story about that. I'll tell a story about that one now. So the Queensland Nurses and Midwives Union, so they represent nurses and midwives. Um, they campaigned ahead of the 2024 Queensland state election where abortion became a bit of an issue. This was corresponding with the US presidential election where it was a massive issue as well. So that was in November, the US election, and the Queensland one was in October. So very, very much abortion was making the news. Anyway, these unions were running political campaigns for Labor, essentially doing scare campaigns on abortion, saying the LNP is going to change the abortion laws. And you basically had the QNMU, represents nurses and midwives, spending millions of dollars on things, on adverts that say abortion is a human right. Abortion is a human right. These people represent midwives who look after these children from the moment that they're conceived to the moment that they are born. This the executives of these unions and the powers that be in these unions are not representative of the grassroots members. Midwives know in their gut that that is wrong. And it's just been for so long they haven't had a choice. They've had to stay there and fund through their union fees these sort of campaigns for things that they would never vote for things that they think are completely evil, go against their conscience. So that's why it's really important that we have competition, whether that's us at Red Union or other pop-up ones. And there are some other unions popping up. We welcome that because competition is going to bring a better product overall, and in the education space, it's desperately needed. You mentioned the good work of Jasmine down there at the ACL. She's fantastic. So is Colleen Harkin at the IPA. They both exposed an enormous amount of rot in the education system, in the curriculum, and even Carly Douglas, I think it was, at the Australian, was pressing Jacinta Allen late last year about a lot of the transgender stuff because it had really exploded that 6-year-olds are being taught about transgender theory. And the premier just doubles down and says, you're the reason that transgender suicide rates are 14 times the rate of normal people, I suppose. But the point is, it's just so perverse. And the people that are losing out are the kids. The people that are losing out are 6-year-olds that know no better, that are being told these radical theories, which are basically a means to an end of mutilating themselves. These children cannot think for themselves. There's a reason why they cannot think for themselves. There's a reason why there are legal guardians for these people, and we're putting them in the hands of people who are more than happy for political purposes for them to be sacrificial lambs. They don't care about these children, and that's why it is so egregious. And I commend the good work of Jasmine at the ACL, and also Colleen, because the transgender stuff in the education system has to stop. It has to come to an end. And we actually interviewed our members on it. We interviewed our members last year, and it came back that 91% of our members did not believe transgender ideology had any place in the
Wow.
classroom. They said it has to be completely out. I think it was 85% said it is not a thing to be able to change your sex. And obviously, that's our members who have left this overwhelmingly left-wing Australian Education Union. But it goes to show that teachers are normal people who want good outcomes for kids. There will be some that are misguided, as there are in all professions. But overwhelmingly, teachers do not support the rot that is being pushed onto them by the union, by the department, and by the various Labor governments, and even Liberal governments, if we're being frank, over the course of the last few decades.
Yeah, no, 100%. And we talk about the lack of quality in our political leaders, and it's very clear to see that it's because that they're not experiencing any of these portfolios. Rather, they've just risen through the unions to get to where they are today. Like that's like a really simple explanation, but it's quite true. Like I heard someone saying that Richard Marles, he's the defense minister, he's never shot a gun before.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, it's not a meritocracy at all on the left. It's very much based on well, sometimes it's sort of the DEI thing, but more so it's based on their dues with the union, which union's got what power in what state, which faction's going to have the power. It's all behind closed doors, and it's not at all done through merit. Otherwise, we wouldn't have Anthony Albanese as our prime minister if it was merit based. So that's essentially where we're at the moment, though. So that's the problem on the left, in the Labor Party. On the right, we just have a complete lack of conviction. So you've had people in the Liberal Party, the National Party, and there are a couple of good eggs, and even One Nation, lacking conviction completely on so many different issues. I've spoken a lot about mass immigration. I'm sure we'll get into that at some stage. But you've got mass immigration, you've got the education system, you've got more broadly the need for economic reform, the energy stuff as well. I mean, you've just had politicians sit back and really refuse to take any controversial stances on these things because they are doing it out of self-preservation, because they're making decisions, again, based off polling rather than conviction. And my conclusion on this, John, is this is what happens when you don't have Christians dominating politics. You get people making decisions based off what is politically convenient for themselves, for their own bank accounts, and you don't have conviction whatsoever. So I think it's a call to arms for all Christians who are thinking about getting involved in politics. If it's not Christians involved, it is people who are against Christ that are running the country, and they are running it into the ground, and it's just going to continue to happen. So I know we'll talk about Christian involvement in politics and policy as well, but I guess that's a bit of an early call to action, John.
Yeah, no, 100%. And yeah, let's chat about mass migration now, because as with COVID, there was a lot of new voices that sort of rose up through the ranks. You've also risen up during this mass immigration debate, appearing at a lot of sort of rallies and lots of podcasts even in the last 12 months. What I think this has been talked about ad nauseum in the conservative space, but what do you think is the overarching problem of mass immigration, and maybe what do you think is the root of it as well? I think it's important when we're talking about issues in a modern in any time really, unless we can hit the root of the problem, can't figure out what the solution should be. So yeah.
Yeah, well, mass immigration is the existential threat to our nation. It is replacing Australians. It is causing an enormous strain on our housing supply, on our energy sector, on all of these different things, on wages. It's having a downward effect on wages. So there's a very material impact, but the immaterial impact, which has its consequences on the streets, and you're seeing this in the UK at the moment, is this non-homogenous society where you have at the altar of multiculturalism, we have sacrificed what was so incredible about our nation, was that we had a distinct Anglo-Celtic identity that was in Christ. We were founded on Christ. In 1901, when we were federated, but even long before that, even more so, we were 96% Christian as a nation, 96% and over 90% Anglo-Celtic. That has now dropped to 43% Christian and about 55% Anglo-Celtic. So this massive drop, this change in what our nation looks like completely has to have an impact. So when you're talking about multiculturalism, not all cultures are equal. Not all cultures work well together. That's why I like to describe it more so, John, as counterculturalism. This is what you see in the streets in the UK, where you've got a Sikh that's allowed to carry a ceremonial dagger, which is legal in Australia, by the way, and stab someone because of religious reasons. He's able to carry that dagger, and he kills someone who's just a white guy. That's not multiculturalism at its best. It's counterculturalism. When you see what happened at Bondi, these two Indian Muslims killing a bunch of innocent people on our beaches, that's not multiculturalism to be celebrated, but it is a necessary downward stream impact of multiculturalism, in my view. So I think it's important to preface this, particularly as Christians, there is completely equal worth, moral worth for every single human being, regardless of your culture, regardless of your skin color, regardless of all of that, regardless of your job, all of it, how much you earn. There is equal, you have equal standing in the eyes of God. There is no doubt about that. But we want to honor God in the way that we set up our society. We want to honor God in the way that we set up our country. And you cannot say for the last 50 to 60 years, while mass immigration has taken hold, or immigration more broadly, that we are now honoring God more than we were 60 years ago. We've fallen away from Christ. Church attendance has plummeted. In the 1950s, and can correct me if I'm wrong on these figures, but 43% of Australians went to church every single week. It's 7% now. 7%. That's going to have an impact on the soul of the country. It's going to have an impact on those who are in charge. It's going to have an impact on what they feel beholden to. And we saw this during COVID. We touched on it. They feel beholden to opinion polls, which are based off non-Christians' basic gratifications, such as, oh, I get a $250 handout. I get a $250 tax break. Great, I'll vote for you. Oh, what are you going to give for me? There's no service of a greater purpose. And I think that's the issue with immigration. Even during the Howard government, which is held up as this sort of sacrosanct lamb of the right wing, between 1996 and 2007, legal immigration was mass on mass, and it was over 70% non-Anglo-Celtic and non-Christian, and that's going to have an impact on what our country looks like. So we often think of Howard and even Abbott stopping the boats, which is incredible. We can't have illegal immigration, but we're also an island nation. You should think that that's pretty much the starting point, or already a given. We should be able to keep people from invading our country. But the point is, they've just come in through the back door. They've come in through things like the university system as well, where you've got this foreign student, just absolute mosh pit of people being able to come through the back door and get visas to stay in our country, and then get permanent residency to stay in our country, being able to vote in our elections. And these people have no allegiance to our country. These people are not Australian by any measure. So you're right. It has been an exhaustive discussion on the right, particularly, I think, since some of these anti-immigration rallies back in, I think August was the first one, August 31st last year. And it sort of ballooned on from there into a discussion about, well, what is Australia? What is an Australian? What does our country look like? And what should it look like? And I overwhelmingly believe that it's a good thing to have distinct nations. I don't think it is a bad thing. I think you can do trade with other nations. I think you can have good relationships with distinct nations. But when you go to Japan, you're not wanting a taste of Morocco. You're not wanting a little bit of Ethiopia. You're wanting Japanese culture. And that's what the Japanese people want. And that's a good thing. When you come to Australia as a visitor, you should enjoy it, but it should be distinctly Australian. You shouldn't be able to just duck into a little pocket and it's like, oh, this is India now. Duck into another little pocket. All right, we're in China. It's just not right. And it's playing out very poorly on our streets. And it's playing out very poorly politically, because we've got people worshipping false gods, worshipping demons in Islam, in Sikhism, in Hinduism, in all of these foreign religions. We've got these people coming into our country on an overwhelming scale, changing our public policy, and they're not honoring the God of Jesus Christ. They're not honoring him at all. And to be fair, the native population, including native Christians, have often stayed silent. There's no questioning that the native Australian population has turned away from Christ as well. I don't think that makes them any less Australian. I think it makes them fundamentally problematic for where our nation is going to go. So I guess I summarize it in two respects. An Australian is overwhelmingly Anglo-Celtic, and Australia as a nation is based off its people, and it's also based off the pillar of Christ, and that's what set forth our laws, our moral framework, and you can't sort of separate the two. Otherwise, there's going to be real issues.
No, yeah, no, 100%. And we're seeing that all across the West that people from the East have migrated into Western countries, and we're seeing the clash of cultures, and people having to come to grips with the fact that differing worldviews haven't been able to tolerate each other because they're fundamentally opposed to each other in what they believe. Um, in terms of like the most basic things of society, like what is the nature of man? What is who is the God we worship? What is the value of life? And so if a society can't agree on these common basic pillar stones of our parliamentary system, our law system, our education system, then no wonder we are seeing what we're seeing in the UK, and in pockets we're seeing that in Australia. And hopefully people are waking up to the UK, and the UK is sort of the mirror that we can see and be like, oh, we don't want to go down that route. So yeah, I feel like it is very possible that Australia can wake up to this reality and turn it around. But it's going to take people standing up. It's going to take the average person talking about it in the workplaces, in schools, in their friendships, and making this a topic of discussion. It's not comfortable to consider these issues, but um, truth has to be stood up for. If it's really the truth, then it's going to come under attack.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you're right when you touch on it being uncomfortable. I mean, the discussion about what an Australian is has been made so uncomfortable because it's overwhelmingly been this values based thing. They've tried to turn being an Australian into a set of values. So if you call something un-Australian or someone un-Australian, it's completely different to some calling someone, you're not Japanese. I guess you're un-Japanese or whatever it might be, whatever the comparison would be. It's almost like this moral judgment on someone to say you're not Australian. I just reject that completely. And I think everyone should reject that completely. It's a categorization of what our nation is. Australianism cannot be determined by whether you subscribe to a set of key values or not. That can be how you judge a good person. That can be how, you judge the fruits of a good Christian. But it can't be the categorization of a very distinct group of people, which is Australians. And I think it's been very difficult because, like I said, people, if they're to be called un-Australian, it's all of a sudden like, oh, I'm a second-class citizen. What? You hate me? You think I don't belong here? I think there's a place for non-Australians in Australia. I just think it cannot be at the rate that it is now. I think we need to have an overwhelmingly Australian population, whether that's 70 to 80 or 90% of the population. At the moment, it's like 55%, and it's just not working. So I think there's a very big role for non-Australians to play in Australia, but it's got to be within a 10 to 20% of the population type thing. It cannot be that you've got a country. You cannot keep a nation if you cannot define the people. And I think that's sort of the conundrum that we're at the moment. And I think it will be uncomfortable. People will feel as though that, they're going to get called labels, you'll be shouted down, racist, whatever it is. We just can't accept it. Like, particularly for the Christian, if you know where your motivation is in your heart, you just cannot be worried about these labels. You cannot be worried about wearing the brunt of someone who rejects Christ, rejects our nation completely, and then is going to somehow categorize you and kowtow you into shutting up. You just have to reject the labels completely.
Yeah, no, 100%. And we're seeing the effect of multiculturalism and um, uh, very bad politicians in the way Christians are being treated in modern society. And I have in front of me the Australian Christian Freedom Index. This was done by multiple great Christian organizations such as ACL, Citizen Go, the Australian Family Coalition, Canberra Declaration, HRLA, Family Voice Australia, and there was a few others involved in this too. And they surveyed 10,808 Australians. That's a huge survey amount compared to a lot of surveys done, especially in polls where it's usually not more than 1,000 or even a couple of hundred. And here's what a couple of stats, which is incredibly disturbing about Australian Freedom Australia. 92% of Christians said it is riskier to affirm Christian beliefs than 5 years ago. 73% felt pressure to keep their beliefs private in public or online or at work. 42% experienced hostility, threats, or harassment for expressing a Christian worldview, and 1 in 4 were denied opportunities in work, volunteering, or leadership because of their beliefs. Like, that is a staggering statistic that the foundations of our Christian society uh, are being literally attacked and demolished, and we think that society can remain cohesive or it can remain what it has been in the good old days, as it would like to say. And another really interesting statistic, and this is about the number of acts that have passed Parliament that have affected Christian belief and practice. And there's been 74 acts that have restricted Christian freedom since the year 2000, and nearly half of those have been in the last 5 years. That is an unimaginable statistic. And I think the answer for me, Edward, coming to this, is I think the church has stepped out of the public square. Well, actually, I don't think. I think it's obvious the church has stepped out of the public square. It only speaks when there's some progressive talking point that it wants to affirm, or maybe during Easter and Christmas. That's about it. Otherwise, the church is like, no, we don't want to talk about politics or these people over here, they're nice people. They'll solve these issues for us. We'll just vote for these sort of people. But when the church steps out of the public square, out of the political square, it loses its role as a conscience of the state, which is defining morality. What does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to, what is life defined as? That is a role that the church can hold. Even the idea of welfare, that was originally the church's role, not the government's role. That's why the government has ballooned to where it is right now. And so I confidently say that the problems we're seeing today are because the church has left the public square.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think there are 2 points on this that are really key to make to separate them out. Absolutely, there is an attack at a policy level, at a governmental level, on Christian freedom, but also on Christianity as being the core of our nation. That has been an attack that has been run for an extraordinarily long time, I would argue, since the 60s. But has obviously ramped up in recent times. We've seen it in some of the stuff around the same sex marriage debate in 2017, in even the abortion debate, in decriminalizing prostitution. Like, there has been a distinct effort to diminish the church's influence and diminish our nation's reliance on Christ. So I think that's absolutely true. And I think the incredible work, an amazing amount of research has gone into that document that you're holding, John. And all the organizations there have really exposed what's happening in our country, which is Christians trying to be bullied into not professing the faith and not acting in the faith. And that sort of brings me to the second point. We can take encouragement from the word, and I think it's Romans chapter 8, and it's Paul writing, and he says, "For I consider the present sufferings nothing in comparison to the glory that awaits." We have to have the attitude and the clarity of mind that here in Australia still, and I don't want this to breed complacency, but we face nothing of the persecution that our brothers and sisters across the world in the faith have. We're not at the death. We're not being, knife at neck, forced to renounce our faith. There are big consequences. You might lose your job. You might lose your livelihood. Like, these are big things, and they need to be addressed. But as a word of encouragement for Christians out there, you cannot discount the work of the Holy Spirit. You cannot discount the plan of God that comes to fruition when we profess the gospel, when we are preaching what we believe in, when we're preaching the truth, which is that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He was sent by the Father to die for us, and that faith in him provides us eternal life. when we profess that truth in our workplace, at our sporting clubs, just catching up with our mates, incredible things happen, and we cannot be so concerned or put the blinkers on and think that we can't share our faith because we might get persecuted in some way, that it might be uncomfortable, or that it might, like, this is what we're called to do, and we should find great encouragement in the world, which we see around us. It has become so decrepit. It's just become so deceitful. Our public policy has just become a bastion for evil. And we should take great encouragement when that comes back on us with force. Words of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ: if the world hates you, remember it hated me first. These should be great encouragements for us as Christians, and it's not always going to be easy. We will face persecution, but we have an incredible amount of gifts given to us here, and to he who more is afforded, more will be expected. And that's certainly us as Christians here in the greatest country on earth, in Australia, where we still have freedom beyond that of others across the world. We should fight to establish Christ ultimately as the Lord and Savior over this country, which he rightly is. And we should push that in public policy, and make sure that our politicians are accountable to the truth and the source of truth. But we must be encouraged by the fact that we have an incredible amount to be grateful for here in this country, and nothing should stop us from preaching the gospel.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think even in the wake of our freedoms withered to some extent, in our values in Australia being withered governmentally and culturally, I think it has made a lot of Christians more bolder in the midst of that. We saw after the Charlie Kirk assassination, we saw as much, where we saw um, thousands of people going to his funeral, millions watched that online, and emboldened to do what he did in different places, and to preach the gospel with more boldness. So I think, yeah, I think that's something we can have hope in, that even a place like China, where persecution is rife there, that the state church it's ruled by the Chinese government, that the gospel is growing there quicker than any other country in the world, and it could potentially be the highest population of Christians by, I think it's 2030 or something like that, at the rate it's going, than any other country in the world. So I think there's a great encouragement in what we're seeing, that overall, no matter what's going on, God's still got his plan. He's still working everything for our good, and we just have to walk in boldness and trust him. But yeah, as we come to a conclusion, Edward, is there any last comments or any points that you wanted to make?
Look, I'll just say the most important thing that you can do, particularly for your audience, which we're young Christians, politically inclined, wanting to get involved, wanting to help. The biggest thing you can do is serve at your local church. Bring your friends along. Serve in whatever ministry you're called to. There are a bunch of different ones. Going along to Bible studies, making sure that you're serious in your faith and you're grounding yourself in your faith first and foremost is going to be far more useful than anything else. So I think understanding that the local church and being very committed to your local church is going to change an incredible amount about our country, because ultimately the calling for the church, it's the manifold wisdom of God, and it is where souls are overwhelmingly saved. The majority of souls are saved at church on a Sunday. We go out, our church goes out and does evangelism on a Friday. We'll do Bible studies, different stuff throughout the week, but it's on Sunday when people bring their mates, their family to church. That is when the overwhelming majority of conviction happens. So get involved in your local church, make that a priority in your life, and incredible things will flow on from there. But yeah, I would say take confidence. We've got a lot of work to do in this country, but as Christians, we should be very, very happy with the fact that we have the truth. It's now our job to communicate the truth, because it's not enough for us to just hang on to it. We need to communicate that truth and be quite strong in what we believe, to be quite forceful in what we advocate for in policy, and also, above all, come at it with an incredible amount of compassion, for we were all once without Christ, and now that we're in Christ, we must want that for our brothers and sisters who are outside the faith. So ultimately having compassion despite all of the incredible evil that we're faced with. And it's often so hard to separate the sin from the sinner. But at the end of the day, that's what God does for us through Jesus Christ. So we must replicate that with others.
Amen. No, that's really good. And Edward, it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed having you on. I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future. But where can people find out more about you and the TPAA?
So jump on www.redunion.com.au. So Red Union, all one word. It sounds very commie Soviet, but it's not. It's just a nice little jab to the Labor Party because red's their colour. No, it traditionally started in Queensland. It was the Maroon Union. And then when we went Australia-wide, it was like, we need to have a different colour. Maroon's very polarising to a lot of people. So, but jump on there. And then I'm just on, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and X as well. So feel free to chuck me a follow there.
Awesome. And we'll have the links to all of those in the description of this video, so you guys can find Edward really easily. Edward, thank you so much for being on the Here I Stand podcast.
Cheers, John. Great to be on. Cheers, mate.
How can we be who we're meant to be based on the vision of our faith if we're denied the right to employ and engage people and even present what we believe is true nature of the human person?
Where we get our hope from as Christians is that Jesus is still on the throne. That's not changed.
And the government have effectively creating blasphemy laws to outlaw Christianity, the foundation of our nation.
When children will be greeted by staff asking them, which pronouns are you using? What do you mean? They are confusing kids unnecessarily.
So that's why the Bible is our foundation for the communion. Of course, Christ is our foundation for salvation. And we follow him when we follow the words of the Bible.
But we have to see the bigger picture. If we don't get everything we want this time around, well, that's no reason to give up. You keep fighting more.
It wasn't until Christian said, yeah, you killed your babies, what are you going to do about this? God had a solution, but the solution wasn't going to be effective if I didn't first acknowledge that I needed that solution.
We are here until we have a law which allows babies to have the same rights as everybody else, and we're not going to go away. I can guarantee that we won't.
May we continue to boldly stand as a light in the darkness, a voice for truth and a force for good.